지금부터
Now we will start this session under the title of Reconstructing Korea-Japan Relations for Sustainable Peace in East Asia. I am the MC for this session. Great meeting you all. Before we begin, I would like to introduce you the moderator of this session. He is the Mr. Kim Jae-jin. He's a Korean National Diplomatic Academy, and he's a professor and as well as a senior advisor of the Center for Japanese Studies. And before working as a professor, he was a diplomat, career diplomat, served as ambassador in the places like Japan, China, United States, and Myanmar. Then I would deliver the microphone to moderator Kim Jae-shin. Great meeting you all. Now we will begin the session under the title of Constructing Korea-Japan Relations for Sustainable Peace in East Asia. I am the moderator of this session. I am the professor and the senior advisor at the Korea National Diplomatic Academy. And before we begin, I would like to give you the purpose of having this session. And the Korea and Japan relations has been under the great the conflicts due to the understanding of in the issue of the colonial interpretation of the colonial past. So the Korea and Japan relationship is at its worst case. So that restoring the bilateral ties is crucial. So the restoring the Korea-Japan the relation is important and meaningful in terms of the peace development in this region. So it should be worked in line with the peace development and prosperity perspective. So that so this session's title is focused in that way. So that we will talk about how we can restore the Korea and Japan relations for sustainable peace in East Asia. And we would like to share the several ideas in this regard. And so to facilitate it, we have invited several experts for this session. On my left-hand side, we have Mr. Nam Gi-jung, the professor of Seoul National University Institute for Japanese Studies. And we also have Takashi Kimiya from the professor at the University of Tokyo. He is here with us online. And then we also have Professor Cho Yang-hyun of the Korea National Diplomatic Academy, and Haraiwa Shunji, the professor of Nanjing University, and also Shin Jung-hwa, the professor at the Department of International Relations at Dongseol University. So we have 2 presenters and 3 panelists. So thank you very much for joining us for this session. And we especially would like to deliver our gratitude for the audiences and also those who are joining us online. So let me share with you the program for this session. Now, this session is scheduled until 6:30, and each of our presenters will make a 15-minute speech. And based on the 2 speakers, the presentation, and we will invite the panelists to share their comments, and then we will have the Q&A session. And after that, we will also open the Q&A session to the floor as well as the online the participants. And at the very last, our 2 presenters will make the final remarks before we wrap up. So first, let's hear from Dr. Nam Gi-jung. Our Professor Nam Ki-jung is an expert in Japanese studies, and he served as a professor in the two other universities in Seoul, in Korea, and then now he is working in Seoul National University Institute for Japanese Studies. So, Mr. Nam, please go ahead. Nice meeting you all. I am Mr. Nam Gi-jung. It is my honor being able to join here as a speaker. And it's a very critical topic, and I'm very glad that I am be part of it. The title of this session is Reconstructing Korea-Japan Relations for Sustainable Peace in East Asia. And I would like to share with you my perspectives, and also would like to share with you the Korea's perspective in this regard. So when I first got this the title, I was very happy. It felt like I am encountering a friend. This especially the word East Asia and the sustainable peace was very friendly to me, and it was very welcoming. So that reconstructing the ties, I could the title itself allowed me to deepen my thoughts in this regard, and the Korean Peninsula and the East Asia. When we think about these two words, the reconstructing the Korea and Japan ties is very important, and the restoring the ties of these two countries. But when if our goal itself lies in the restoring the tides itself, then it can be very difficult, the challenge for these two nations to achieve this the goal, because it's these two countries are faced with a very complex these issues. That is why the reconstructing the Korea-Japan ties is much better for us in terms of the approach, so that as we move in the long run, maybe we are able to restore the bilateral ties as we focus on reconstructing the two relations in East Asia. So I think, well, there are two things that we need to take into account. First one is what kind of issues are going on in East Asia, and then, well, this especially this region is undergoing the greatest transformation, and so that we need to see this in a larger perspective, and then well, in this larger perspective, we can put into the restoring, the reprocessing of the Korean peace process, and how we can build up this Korean peace process in line with this, so that we will have these two large pillars into our mind, and then I will focus on the four issues. First one is Biden's diplomatic directions and how to restore the alliance and multilateralism. That is one thing. And the second one is where the Japan lies in the Korean peace process. And the third one is third one is relevant to the second one as well, but the third one is the North Korea and U.S. relations. So that for the sustainable peace in East Asia. But although the three things are more relevant to the geopolitical issues, but as we are in the era of the COVID-19 outbreak, then we are at a moment to think about from a somewhat different, the relevant but somewhat different the point of view in terms of the COVID and overcoming this COVID-19. So that's why I have came up with this fourth the issues agenda, let's say. So first one. I would like to talk about is Biden's diplomatic directions and what kind of implication that it has in our region. The Biden's the diplomatic directions are more geared toward restoring alliance and multilateralism. And in that regard, there were the third Korea-UK Foreign and Defense Ministerial meeting, the so-called 2+2. And by doing so, the United States is set out to restore the alliance in the Asian region. But not only that, the Indo-Pacific region is a vision led by the United States, but not only the United States, but European nations like the France and the European nations are the eyeing on the Indo-Pacific region as well. And the United Kingdom and France, and then their presence, let's say re-presence on the Indo-Pacific region is very critical thing that we need to focus on. And then so that is the worldwidely, that is we see a kind of mood that return to the multilateralism, and we need to see this from from the long past, so from the historical perspective. So that let's go back to 100 years ago. So that's 190s. And then when we think about what had happened in the 100 years ago, let's say the return to normal. So that it is in the during this 1917, in the 2090s, there were rule-based international, the liberal order, and we can say that it was the kind of the origin to the Cold War, so that the League of Nations in the 1920s, and then what kind of implications that it has on the nowadays in the East Asia. Does it resonate to nowadays in this region? So at that time, the Japan somehow came 100 years ago. The Japan acted as a kind of the hidden actor, and Korea somehow was in a position wanted to break down this kind of the Cold War, the past, and the Cold War, and India Pacific has gained a lot of the position, has gained a lot of awareness by the Western countries, and that also we see this Quad Plus. Then does Quad Plus complement the U.S.-Japan alliance, or is it the other way around? Is it an alliance with independent nature? So where is it going forward? So that's we need to take into account these kind of issues as well, and Indo-Pacific division or the directions are somehow being talked about in a way that it is a kind of fixed strategy. But over the past 100 years, and we see that the restoring of the ties or restoring of this the Western presence in this region, so that I would say that it is not the finalized one. This Indo-Pacific strategy or Indo-Pacific region, a vision, is somewhat in the process of being development. And that the Biden, that it has called for the Biden had mentioned the Indo-Pacific as a secure and prosperous, but we would say either this a free and open the Indo-Pacific, and that this vision it has gained a lot of consensus within the United States. But even if so, we should say that this vision and concept is somewhat different from what President Trump had. President Trump's vision for this in this region, and that is keep on revising some a little by little, and then in the United States and Japan had came up with had done held the summits, the state summits, and in these statements. In their statements, they had talked, especially talked about the Taiwan. Well, we can say that the United States wanted to put this Taiwan words, wanted to mention the Taiwan in their official bilateral statement. So that the trilateral, in terms of the Taiwan, North Korea's denuclearization, and the trilateral collaboration among the U.S., Japan, and Korea is very critical. And we can say that although the position of this position of the U.S., Japan, and Korea, and all our neighboring nations are being reflected in the U.S. and Japan joint statement. So that's and also it had mentioned on the Korean Peninsula's peace process. And then we could find out their commitment to improve the prosperity and the security in this region. And as a the relationship has been elevated to a comprehensive alliance, and then we can imply from here that a lot of the U.S. position has been put into here, and the Japan is somehow very much involved in this case. And then we can say that Japan wanted to take part in this regard, so that in the Korea, so the U.S. relationship and the borders trilateral collaboration, and we can in this that's it is reiterated that each country's the opinion and the stance has been reflected on this joint statement, and we can call it the recoupling of the relationship, and it has been noticed for the past 2 years between the the United States and Japan, and the United States relationship to Korea. For the Korea, the peace process, and from the year 2018 March, the the Korean Peninsula's peace process has been going on. And after the year 2018 March, there were around 30, including the phone call summits. Well, the United States and Japan had almost 30 times of the summits. And then during this the bilateral the summits, they had talked about the denuclearization and also the CVID, and then various the issues those two countries have. And it was more like a top-down approach, and between the President Trump, and then the Abe, Prime Minister Abe, were taking the top-down process, but in the Biden's administration, what has been shifted to bottom-up approach, so that it's somehow the cause for the changes in the Korean Peninsula's peace process, so that in the short term, it can be a kind of obstacle to Korea, but in the longer term, that having this kind of the bottom-up approach, it can provide a kind of opportunity to us. Then let us talk about the historical background, the Korean Peninsula's peace process in Japan. We can identify that Japan plays a key role here, and so after the Korean War, during the Korean War, there was the Japan had also played a somewhat hidden but very critical role during the Korean War. So it's taken that into account. then so that we that it is that and that the problem is that those both of these two sides have not taken much importance, have not taken much the of importance to this Japan's the kind of role that Japan has played during the Korean War, and after the post Korean Peninsula's peace process in year 2018. Well, there were two events that we need to take into account. One is the 1988, the 7th of July Declaration, and Japan also played a key role here. And the two, after the 727 Declaration, Japan has talks with North Korea, but as but they failed to restore their national ties from that from that perspective. The North Korea thought that it is kind of the sloped the playground, and then it is important to make it a kind of balance, so that we can say that well, the motive, North Korea's nuclear the ambition can also find its origin in the Japan's role it had played with North Korea, and United States and also had played an important role in this regard, and based on the better and that it had shaped the better the relations inter-Korean relations, and the United States played a key role to facilitate the betterment of the two inter-Korean relations, and so that well, not only during the Korean War, but also that in the inter-Korean relations, Japan was an hidden actor, but who had played a critical role. But Japan's the role, especially we also from the historical point of view, we need to it is important that we take into account the Japan's role and how we should interpret this in the actual the process. And that we kind of downplayed Japan's role it had played in East Asia and the inter-Korean relations. And through the Trump administration, the Japan, we can see that in recent the recent past, let's say from the Trump administration, somehow Japan worked against the peace in the Korean Peninsula, so that we can say that the peace process in the Korean Peninsula is great, but still facing a lot of great challenge. So that the realizing this the Korean peace process is a long way to go, and the Korean peace process, as we see around us. Well, I would say that they had played a hidden role, and then Japan also had some kind of the plan A and plan B in regard to the Korean Peninsula's peace process. Due to the limit of time, I will not dive deep into it in this regard. And Japan had Japan's plan B. Japan took care of the diplomatic situations while contacting the North, and during this Prime Minister Suga's administration, Japan has taken somewhat different direction. So, but it's somehow in line with it follows after the examples of the policy directions of the Prime Minister Abe. And to Prime Minister Abe, the Japanese abductee issue to North Korea was the priority issue to be solved. And then the Prime Minister Abe has been keep saying that without solving this problem of the Japanese abductees in the North Korea, and then without their safe return to Japan, no more talks, no any talks will be possible with the North Korea. So Japan, we can say that if the Japan has to take somewhat different position, then we can say that it had opened up many different the situations, so that they are playing on many different parts. So they're taking into account many different options and the many different countermeasures, let's say, and I think that the Japan and the North in terms with the Japan and North Korea's the relationship, and the North Korea's has its own way of talking. North Korea say that they will not join the Olympic, and they mentioned on the issue of the past that in the North Korea's way of confronting the under-implemented promise made at the North Korea and the Japan summit. And to change this kind of mood, the COVID-19 has somehow motivated for the transition of each country's stance. So due to the time. Due to the time straint, I might have to keep it short. And in this COVID-19 era, we are facing a great the transformation and then also the Korean-Japan relations. It was once identity politics, and then it has shifted to life politics, and then the geopolitics has been from the geopolitics. I started with the geopolitics, and then it has changed to chronopolitics. And that the way to deal with it, and that the policy directions that deals with it will be very crucial. So far, the downward relationship, the worsened relationship between the Korea and Japan, has a great impact. And the worsening of the relationship between the Korea and Japan, some would say that it is in fact helpful in consolidating and gaining domestic public support. But this kind of the ideas, or the Korea and Japan does not share a common geopolitical interest, need to be seen from the different point of view from now on. And then in this era of the COVID-19 have offered a different option, which is the possibility of conflicts and disputes between the light politics and nationalism, and also the great change, the COVID-19 have paved a new opportunity for the new relationship between Korea and Japan, and the era that we are living in, that shows that the shifted relationship between the China and U.S. relationships that stems from the fundamental and structural reasons, and then there is it is never easy that the Korea and the United Korea and Japan issue is never easy. That is never an easy issue. But there is a change in the domestic politics in Japan, and so does the Korea's internal politics. And North Korea is gaining worldwide attention as a so-called nuclear weapon the countries. So it is therefore necessary to restore and rebuild and redefine the Korean-Japan relations in align with the current the era of greater transformation. So in that regard, so that it is that colonial past is is something that neither side, neither country can fully manage, but it can be. It has been a deterrent factor for Korea and Japan relations, and then well, this we when we talk about this restoring of this diplomatic ties between Korea and Japan. It was, but each side, both sides, has been very cautious using this word reconstructing. But, well, but when we look at the 1965 ties, well, the history tells us well, that if instead of the reconstructing, if the Japanese prefer the word redefining, maybe we can welcome that concept. And after we, as in the past, as we undergo the Cold War, the post Cold War, the era that we need to see that our bilateral relations need to be redefined in the context of the geopolitical the situation. So that will, but due to the limit of time, I might have to stop here, and then we will further discuss during the discussion session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nam. For sustainable peace in the Northeast Asia, he mentioned about the positions required for Korea. To reconstruct the Korea-Japan relationships. Now, we should think of the Korean peace process and the impact of the process to Japan and the relationship between North Korea and Japan. And he provided a very in-depth analysis on these relationships. In the post-COVID-19, he also mentioned why we need to reconstruct the relationships between the Korea and Japan. Thank you for your nice comment. We are going to continue this topic during the Q&A session. Now it's time to invite Mr. Kimiya Tadasi. He graduated from the Tokyo University, and he also received a PhD in the Korea University as well. So, Professor Tadasi is now professor of Tokyo University. He's now researching Korean politics and Korean diplomacy. Now 15 minutes will be given to Mr. Tadasi. Hello everyone, I'm very honored to be invited to this forum. Jeju Peace Forum. This is my second time to join this forum. I truly hope that I'd like to visit this forum in person after the end of COVID-19. Currently, relationships between the South Korea and Japan has been changed from asymmetric to symmetric. In this regard, what choices we have made and what we should do down the road. Professor Nam mentioned the current relationship between the two countries and the possible future world. I think that I'm not sure the current Japanese policy, regarding the relationship with South Korea, has fully considered the long-term relationship with South Korea. If the U.S. withdraw its troops from the South Korea, I think the relationship, the geopolitical relations or the situations here in Northeast Asia will be very complicated. So their expectation the Japanese expectation to diplomacy is very high. However, reality is different. So Professor Nam, he tried to analyze the gap between the policies and reality. First, in the 1990s, the relationship between the two countries have been asymmetric. However, now it is different. I'd like to mention this in the 4 points. First, power. In the 1980s, Korea was a developing country and Japan was an advanced country. There was a huge gap in the economic power, and Korea pursued kind of a vertical Korea pursued a vertical partnership with Japan. However, the gap between the two countries was narrowed, and now the two countries are competing in the global community. In 1980s, the world considered Japan is a advanced democratic country, and however, the Korea was had a kind of military junta there. However, now we are market-oriented democratic. Both countries are market-oriented democratic countries. Until the 1980s, we had our relationship was very simple, economic and political relationship. However, in the 90s, we built kind of a multi-layered relationships among the local governments and among the civic groups. The flow of the value. Before, it was unidirectional from Japan to Korea. However, that's not the case anymore. All the flow of culture and art is now bidirectional. So in that sense, I think the relationship between the two countries, previously it was asymmetrical. Now it is symmetrical. In the Cold era, our relationship was kind of complementary. Japan made contribution in the economic development of Korea. It was an attempt to guarantee kind of security of Japan. And South Korea, the North Korea in the global competition. So the relationship between the countries. That's why I'm saying that the relationship between the two countries was complementary. However, later on, the both countries started to compete. The differences emerged between the two countries. Korea used to be a tracker, however, and Korea just aware that they wanted to catch up with Japan. However, now they are on the same balances. So, which means that Japan is now trying to Japan is taking notice of the kind of the emerging economic power of Korea. Japan is thinking that Korea has become very aggressive because Japan tolerated such kind of movement in Korea. In some sectors, we share our value. However, there are differences in the mechanism, which means this worsens the conflict between the two countries. Japanese government, they request the Korean government to keep the promise, keep the appointment that which was made in the past. And the Japanese government think that by keeping the promise, we can value justice. However, the democracy itself, the Korean government thinks the democracy itself is not sufficient. And then in the democracy, what is important is to pursue changes. And multi-dimensional approach and diversification. By pursuing these values, I'm not sure what kind of advances we have made for to the two countries. Balanced information, the balanced value, will facilitate mutual understanding. However, those values may worsen the criticism. So, in the competition, there can be a good competition, of course. However, on the other side, because of the competition, it can be a kind of zero-sum game. And what kind of a competition will be desirable? It is about the choices of political leaders and the choices of civic groups. Currently, we have historical issues and territorial issues and kind of identity issues. With these issues, then we will just face a zero-sum game between the two countries. And the international environment is not favorable as well. So I do not think the zero-sum game is a reasonable choice to both countries. Historical issues, territorial issues. So far, we have managed to control these issues. However, those issues now is a main agenda now between the two countries because we failed to find the consensus in the diplomacy. The gap itself the diplomatic gap is growing. Now, political leaders, they do not want to, they are reluctant to accept kind of possible risks, political risks. After the end of Cold War, Korea, South Korea, and Japan then continue to their cooperation to better respond to the nuclear weapons in North Korea. Because North Korean missiles are common kind of threat to the security of both countries. However, since the inauguration of Moon Jae-in administration, it appears that President Moon Jae-in is focused more on inter-Korean relationship rather than the denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula. From the Korean perspective, we think that this may undermine the Korean Peninsula's, the peace process. Because of North Korean issues, I think the relationship between South Korea and Japan is worsening. In 2018, the relationship between the North Korea and the U.S. The South Korean government tried to improve the relationship between North Korea and the U.S. However, such kind of approach failed to gain kind of support from the international community. So the conflict between China and the U.S. if the relationship between the two countries, China and US, is worsening, it is not easy to gain support of those two countries to improve the relations with North Korea. Okay. Biden administration, security, trade, and science and technology. Now we are seeing a growing conflict between China and the US. Security, South Korea relies on the US in terms of security and relies more on the China because for the economic issues. However, that is not the case in Japan. And Indo-Pacific scheme. Now we can say the Indo-Pacific scheme is so far successful, and the alliance between the US and Japan is getting more important, which is good for Japan. And that will not worsen the relations between China and the US. However, in this geopolitical arena, the relation between the South Korea and Japan will not be considered lightly. Should not be considered lightly. We should prevent possible damages to the relationships. So protect the scope of the relation between China and the US. So I think that we should maintain the current status to make a better atmosphere to South Korea and Japan. And we should enhance the cooperation as well. So I think at this point we have a consensus. Lastly, Korea and Japan also their share. Okay, both countries are the alliance. The ally of the U.S. The management of allies is not easy. For efficient management of alliance, the comparison of loyalty to the U.S. will not be helpful. For management of alliance, South Korea and Japan should cooperate. North Korean factors and other factors. Superficially, you may think that we have only differences. However, we have common points for the interests of each country. Each country can do the job alone. Only in the limited scope. However, if we cooperate, we can make more achievements. If now, because of the historical issues or the territorial issues, because of these issues, if we cannot make further progress, I think we need to set those issues aside to make further progress. Now, President Biden values the importance of the alliance, right? Now, President Moon Jae-in should try to make kind of changes in its relations with Japan. Conscription issue or the comfort women issue. Okay, for these issues, however, the Japanese government keep insisting that the Korean government should change its stance regarding these sensitive issues. We will have G7 summit and other international meetings. So now President Moon is expecting possible kind of changes or shift in the North Korea and the U.S. relationships. In the Korean diplomacy, what about the kind of presence of the Japanese government in the Korean diplomacy? To make fruits, to make achievements in the relationship. With North Korea, Japan, North Korea, and the U.S. And China, involvement of Japan is required. We should not give up on this. The Korea peace process will be okay. The Korean government should persuade the Japanese government and let them know of that why the Korean peace process will be helpful to Japan. Last point is that we will have this book published here in Japan. This will be written in Japanese. Please read this book if you are interested. Thank you very much.
교수님 발표
Thank you very much for your presentation. That he had talked about, he had given us a very in-depth the ideas on the Korean-Japan relations and also the structural changes that shift that Korea and Japan need to take, and also that had talked that touched upon the different the policy directions have been held by the United States by the Korea and Japan, and also that he had emphasized on the importance of the bilateral ties. So that's well, as we have seen that from any other both seminars, but we have only 28 minutes until the end of this session. So that, but we have the 3 panelists. So. So due to the time limit, please keep the time into the 5 minutes. So let's first invite the Professor Jo Yang-hyun for your remark. Thank you very much, Mr. Kim Jae-shin. It is my honor being able to be here. Since I'm given only 5 minutes, I will keep it brief. As our Professor Nam Gi-jung and Professor Tadasi have mentioned, what is they have came up with very comprehensive, in-depth ideas, but the common ideas that they have shared that can be the ideas they had shared with us is very relevant to all of us. He has mentioned our Professor Nam Gi-jung had talked about the life politics, and that in terms of this the Korean peace process, what Korea and Japan need to play in this regard, and we have this issue of the colonial past, interpretation of the colonial past, and then he had the idea that he came up with offered a kind of alternative methods to solve this problem. And then Professor Kimia had also came up with a very pragmatic methods of and our Professor Man Gi-jung had came up with the very pragmatic directions, and the ideas that the presentation that Professor Nam Gi-jung that had said, he had came up with very in-depth insight and encompassing the very array of issues. So that it is never easy to fully understand his ideas, but it was, of course, it was very in-depth and insightful. So he had came up with he said he mentioned about the importance of the decoupling, and how we can how do you perceive So about our alliance, does it have to be changed, or does it have to take a different form? And or since it is not necessary, should it being the breakdown? And then you also have mentioned that we are faced with the stubble of facets. So and you have also mentioned that great transformation is critical, but well, even if we try to understand it in the perspective of labor politics, the existing the relationship is in a is in a not unfriendly relations. Let's say that to solve a kind of to in our on our ways forward, the understanding of the colonial past and our different ideas of the colonial past need to become priority, and then would be much better if you could come up with the solution to this the critical issue that the two countries have. Maybe you already had the answer yourself, but due to the time limit, you could not share it with us, as far as I understand. And for the Kimiya Tadashi, he have came up with a diplomatic the strategy, and you also, since it's our neighboring nations that has made different directions, so that you have mentioned on the zero-sum game. On the other hand, the need for this dialogue, the Moon administration, well, I know it is ironic, but recently, the Korea and Japan are making the kind of gesture that they would like to have the bilateral summit. And well, in the G7, well, we could we also read the kind of the news articles that at the G7, Prime Minister Suga was reluctant to greet or have some the conversation with the President the Moon. So that from the outsider's point of view, it seems like the Prime Minister Suga is very passive in rebuilding the ties with Korea, and because there are a lot of current issues, and then the hurdles of the current issues. And well, isn't it well that there's also this the sense that isn't it the time that Korea and Japan need to come together on a table to find out the solutions to the facing problems, so that isn't it the time to review the positions of each country? So any ideas in this regard? Thank you very much. The Professor Cho, we only got 20 minutes. And our Professor Cho has given the Professor Nam 3 questions, and then and also the two Mr. Kimiya. You have also asked the Mr. Kimiya the several questions, so that due to the very limited of time, also please we might have to move on to our the other panelists first due to the very limited of time. So please keep it in 5 minutes.
소리가 안 나오네.
はい。
はい。
はい、ありがとうございます。
Okay, thank you very much. Because we don't have much time. Okay, let me directly go to my main point. Regarding your presentations by the two speakers, I think Mr. Zhou already summarized the important points, and it was those were very interesting. It was very impressive. They made good points, I think, from their own perspective. Listening to your presentations, I thought at the end of the day, it's about how to respond to China. Should we make responses to China? That is a common agenda, I think, for both countries, I mean, South Korea and Japan. Personally, until 1998, I worked at the Japanese, the embassy in Beijing. I returned to Japan in the early 1990s, when we have kind of meeting with South Korea. North Korean issues always was part of the main agenda. However, because our positions are different, right? Korea wanted to utilize the emerging economic power of China. However, the Japanese government was rather cautious. I think those differences back in 1990s still have been affecting the relations. I mean, the differences in our positions regarding China. Now, Korea values China because of the economic relations, right? In that sense, Japanese government also agree with that. So in the South Korea and Japan relations, I think we will have some room to make further improvement. I mean, to reconstruct the relations regarding North Korean issues. As Mr. Kimia mentioned, for Korea peace process, Mr. Nam also mentioned some negative points. From my perspective, for Korea peace process, so I mean the failure of the U.S. and North Korea dialogue in Hanoi, it was because of I think former President Trump. He changed the mind all of a sudden, right? And that was, I think, the main primary reason at the time. And we have some kind of structural issues. So South Korea and Japan should think of, I think, North Korea and the U.S. should come to the table, okay, for negotiation. If South Korea or Japan just focus on the North Korean issues, we cannot play a critical role in making improvement in these relations. And what would be the roles required for both countries? We should think of these points. And the ultimate goal is CVID. The irreversible, the dismantlement of nuclear weapons, right? And South Korea and Japan, some issues that we can share include the short and the mid-range, the missiles. Regarding these issues, of course, we can share our views and opinions and make further collaboration, I think. As we don't have much time, I'd like to ask one question to each. First, okay, to Professor Nam. You mentioned about this, the system in the 1965, right? I had a chance to ask a question this question about the relationship between the U.S. and Japan, and he mentioned that the relationship between the Japan and the U.S. is important regardless of the North Korean issues. Regardless of what present the U.S. has, the relationship between the U.S. and Japan is critical. So I asked the same question to a Korean person and the Korean kind of diplomat, and the Korean diplomat also answered the same way. However, currently, I think for some issues, the Korean government, current Korean governments have been sensitive regarding the year 1965 system. Professor Na mentioned many things. He also mentioned redefinition of the system. What changes can you expect? I'd like to ask this question to Professor Nam. And to Professor Kimiya, Kimiya, I think Professor Kimiya explained well about the presence, the position of the Japanese government regarding the sharing of value. He also mentioned about the democracy. When I asked the question to Japanese diplomat at the time, the term that both countries to share kind of a value, such kind of sentence was removed. Currently, now this point, of course, we have different administration in Korea. Regarding the rule of law, I think regarding the rule of law, the Moon Jae-in administration has a different point. I'd like to listen to the opinion of the Professor Kimiya.
감사합니다. 한일 관계에서
So thank you very much. You have talked about the U.S. and North, the CVID, the issues, and also the possibility of the collaboration in addressing the North Korean issues, and to Dr. Kimiya about the rules of the law. So we have several the questions to our presenters, and let's invite the professor, the Professor Shin Jung-hwa, for your the panelist remark. So for the next 5 minutes, I have several questions. So it is my honor to be able to be here with all of you. And then Professor Nam Ki-jung, Professor Kimiya, I am of the same mind in a lot of the things that you have shared. I have 2 questions. Well, I have some questions. It is relevant to both of you. How the first, what kind of approach about the Korea, the Japan relations, that would the Japan denuclearize itself, and in the 2018 summit, and then when we look at the German summit, what Korea will want from the North Korea, and in terms of the North Korea and Japan and also summit, and also the Inter-Korean summit, what North Korea wants, is that maybe the North Korea, what North Korea wanted is for Korea to play a kind of the stepping stone, the kind of road heading toward the United States, and also the lifting of some kind of economic sanctions. So that I think that's what North Korea wanted to achieve from this South Korea and also from this United States. So we need to see North Korea as one of the actors, and then what kind of ideas they have inside their mind. I have one question to Dr. Nam Ki-jung. In the Biden administration, during its the first initial period of the administration, Korea and Japan had done some kind of efforts to restore the Korea and Japan ties, but the Korea but in practice it says that the Korea wants Japan to come up with some kind of answers, solutions to to our problems. Then And then, well, in that regard, is the United States playing is it playing a right role as a middleman, or is it the Japan refusing to give the answers to Korea's question? In terms of this trilateral relations, Korea, Japan, and United States, then well, whether then and also, is it in our ways ahead? Can how would this trilateral relationship would work? Is it more like a extended form of bilateral ties, or it will be one trilateral ties? And in the Trump administration set up a free and open in the Indo-Pacific vision, and then it was an counteract against China, and then the fake the China and also countered this vision with this its economic the with the its economic so-called economic means. So United States is in a sense that it is more like a security related the approach. That how would Korea, what kind of role should Korea play in this kind of the geopolitical condition? And then, well, it was during this the joint summit. It was in the North Korea in the United States and the Japan summit. Well, in their statement, well, it had came up with it had mentioned on the Taiwan, and then to our presenters, why do you think those two countries came up with the idea of Taiwan? And in the in Korea, we are in a situation, as you know, we are a divided nation now. Then the well when well so well, but maybe we can interpret the United States' intention to by mentioning the Taiwan. It is their intention to bring together the Korea and the Japan in this regard. So what kind of ideas do you have in this regard? To Professor Kimiya, in regard to the North Korean strategy. Is it something that both Korea has our own strategy and Japan has its own strategy? Then maybe we see the kind of we see that we share different ideas in dealing with North Korea, and then it was noticeable when the North Korea had the nuclear weapon missile test, so that there is Japan is calling for the nuclearization of the North Korea, and the United States, as mentioned in previous presentations, be it the Trump administration or the any other administrations, but they have similar the stance toward the North Korea. What Japan wanted from the North Korea was the removal of the CVID. There was the issue of the CVID. Then what is their the real intention? Is it denuclearization, or is their attention more focused on the short-term missiles? So what do you think is Japan's real intention toward North Korea? And then also because the Japan thought that abductee issue is their priority in dealing with North Korea. So what is their priority? What is the Japan's priority? Is it denuclearization or is it short-term missile? So and then you have our presenters mentioned that the reconstructing the Korea-Japan relation is important, but North Korea, and Japan's relationship can this trilateral relationship can be formed? So so that we can accommodate the both United States and China's stance, and then by working together with Korea, South Korea, North Korea, and Japan, maybe we can deviate some way and then autonomously do present our ideas. That's our my remarks. So we have slightly 5 minutes left. And well, we are talking about a very important topic, and we are only given 80 minutes. Well, I would say that it is so short, and then I would like to ask for your understanding for my lack of managing the time. So this is the done for, since we got only 5 minutes left, and then since we have we also have the audiences offline and online. Do you have any questions? If not, then since we have our three panelists have came up with very important questions. So before we wrap up, put our Professor Nam and Professor Kimiya, and please very briefly. I can only give you 1 minute and 30 seconds. So please go ahead. Maybe I was so much into the kind of research work that I'm conducting, and that it somehow become too deep and too extensive, so deep and so extensive. It becomes somehow very lengthy. So that's my presentation somehow has raised many questions from our panelists. But as we are in this era of greater transformation, it came into my mind that that's taking into account the situation of nowadays in this regional element. It is very important. And it is too optimistic to believe that Korea and Japan relationship would much get better. But I think that in the very realistic point of view, just a change of different the administration from one president to another, and then the administration say the political direction can somehow transform these two countries of the diplomatic relations all of a sudden. I think that is not not practical way of thinking. So that when we need to see it's from this our much longer the historical past perspective, and that we can get some ideas from the past as well, and then I think it is required maybe by the both Korea and Japan that we need to set a new balance, as you set a new relationship based on this firm and the concrete ideas on the shared ideas on the past. And in the Korean and Japan relation, Korea government is keep on saying about this issue of the colonial past, but the answer to just a yes or no, right or wrong, it is maybe we need to a different approach here. And as we are, I might have to stop here. Okay, so Dr. Kimiya.
I'd like to make a comment for each speaker. First to Mr. Cho. To go to our relationship newly, our relationship has been changed to competing and conflicting relations, right? internally it is a risk to show a kind of compromising attitude to Korea. So it is a kind of internally political risk. And you mentioned the rule of law and the differences in the sense of value. The interpretation of laws between the two countries, I think, different. That is the primary reason. I mean, the cause of conflict. And Professor Shin mentioned many things about North Korean strategy of Japan. I think the answer can be very palpable. First, nuclear weapons or missiles. Nuclear weapons, missiles, and kidnapping issues. We want to resolve all these issues all at once. The kidnapping issue is important. We cannot ignore this issue. So, 3 issues. We should think about how we can comprehensively, resolve all these 3 issues all at once. And now I'm just watching. Seeing my watch because of the limited time. I think this concludes our session on the Reconstructing Korea-Japan Relations for Sustainable Peace in the East Asia. As mentioned in this session mainly, we hope that you can see a reconstruction of the relations between South Korea and Japan, that we can cooperate for sustainable peace in the East Asia. 2 professors and 3 discussants and all the audiences online and offline, thank you very much for attending this session. Thank you. Once again, I'd like please give all the participants a big round of applause. Thank you very much for attending this session. It was a session on the Reconstructing Korea-Japan Relations for Sustainable Peace in the East Asia. So this ends all the sessions in this whole Crystal D. Tomorrow we'll have very interesting sessions as well. The impact of COVID-19 on the immigration policies and inclusion and prosperity. We will have this session, interesting session tomorrow. Please join us tomorrow as well. Thank you very much for staying with us. Thank you.